what I'm going to do now is, I believe we're going to shake up the order slightly and go to Pete, who's on the line, for our man on the ground in sunny Merimbula. What a fantastic place. I hope you're catching a few prawns under the moonlight there in the estuary. So he's going to speak to us about is Australia missing the last mile e-solution, which I'm very interested to hear. So thanks, Peter, take it away.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody from Ewan country, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference as well as my presentation. Okay, so my question is Australia missing the last mile e-solution? So the conference obviously is focusing on four-wheeled and two-wheeled vehicles, long distances, very convenient, etc., etc. I want to concentrate on the last mile or the first mile of the commute, and also a bit of fun. So what are we talking about? We'll use the general term e-scooters. E-scoots, they have one or more wheels. They only have one rider, has to be wearing a helmet. They're low powered, 200 watt maximum legally. They have limited top speeds, and it depends on the jurisdiction. In some cases, only 10 kilometres an hour, but in the ACT, up to 25 kilometres an hour, which is quite reasonable for CBD commuting. They should have lighting, front and rear. Even if they can't be ridden at night, it's still good, as in daylight driving lights, etc. They should have a hand brake actuation, which doesn't mean they need to have a handbrake lever. It could be something that's actually on your hand. And typically the weights start at about 10 kilos and go up to 60 kilos, which is a Segway, the one in the bottom left-hand side there. Certainly not something that you would take on the train. And in fact, if they're more than about 20 kilos, then commuting is out if you've then got to get onto public transport or carry it upstairs. We're not talking about electric bikes, which are covered under different legislation. They're nationally compliant, pretty common, range in price from conversions at about $2,000 through to new ones about $4,000, $5,000 and up. We're not talking about illegal personal mobility devices. Most of those available in shops or online in Australia at the moment, either online or from overseas, are illegal. And the major reason is that they exceed 200 watts. In some states and territories, skateboards are not permitted. We're not talking about motorised mobility devices, as in gophers, wheelchairs and so on, used by people with mobility challenges. We're not talking about more than one rider. And all states, even where they've had trials, are very, very strong on not riding under the influence or while using a mobile phone. And we're not talking about personal mobility devices that you can sit on. You need to stand on these. So why e-scoots? Well, I think there's two major reasons. One is the first and last mile commute, which I'll talk a little bit more about. And the other one is recreation. As Chris has just said in the earlier session, riding motorbikes, riding push bikes, riding scoots is fun, and people should be encouraged to do that, get out, breathe some fresh air and ride safely. The major considerations for e-scoots are obviously zero carbon transport, which has been the big push in the ACT. They're ideal for shorter trips. I'd imagine that if you had to commute more than about 15 or 20 kilometres to work on an e-scoot, it would become rather a drudge. So we are talking about shorter trips. And the major advantage of them is their affordability. Now you can buy good e-scoots from $500, $600 up. You can spend several thousand. But as with everything, you pay for what you get. You need to look very carefully at the warranty and support that you're going to get with the vehicle. So Three questions that you might ask when you're looking at whether you might decide to go e-scooting are, can I ride an e-scoot on a road, footpath or bike track? And interestingly, the answers are not yes or no for all. Can recreational devices advertised as toys be used on a road, footpath or bike track? That one's much more difficult, and it's fair to assume the answer is mostly no. Can I ride anywhere apart from on private property? Well, on private property, you can ride nearly anything, nearly any way you like. But in many of the states and territories, you're stuck on private property. A short disclaimer on this presentation. This is my own personal research, and I may well have missed something. It's very difficult with several of the state transport departments to find out what's actually allowable. In some cases, the answer is no, 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 in capital letters, no. And then you look a bit further and find, oh, but there's an exception. Look at this extra page. And I also didn't try to include the various trials that have been run in Darwin, in Adelaide, and I believe in other states. But my major experience is based on what we were able to do in the ACT. So the current situation, well, I started to actually list these out, and then I thought, wow, that's going to be really boring and it's not actually going to solve the problem. So I've summarised by grouping. The ACT and Queensland certainly lead the pack. E-scoots, with a few limitations, are approved. There's clear guidance available on the websites. They're in regular use and people are just getting on with it, and that's fantastic. It's the way it should be nationally. In Tasmania, WA and Victoria, well, the first thing that you find is, no, you can't do it. And then you find, well, actually, as long as they're less than 200 watts and you wear a helmet and you're over, in some cases, 12 years, 14 years, 16 years or 18 years, and you're limited to a maximum speed of 10 kilometres an hour, you can ride an e-scoot in those states. In South Australia, the Northern Territory and New South Wales, it's a big NO. As I said before, there are trials. The major fallback is they're not registerable vehicles, which I think is the ultimate cop-out. I think it boils down to a great reluctance to actually confront the worldwide situation, and e-scoots are part of life in most of the world, but not in Australia. I think it comes down to denial of the fact that we actually need to be getting on with these things. So what can AEVA do? Well, we need to embrace personal mobility devices in a responsible way. It's no good whinging that we're stuck with 200 watts and they only have a 15% hill climbing capacity and they'll only carry a 100 kilo load and so on and so forth. We need to work within the existing legislation, and then we need to press for update and expansion of that legislation. We need to support the trials. I'm not dismissive of them. They fulfill a valuable demonstration, but in some cases, people have said, oh, the trials are only limited to, for example, the close CBD, or they're excluded from the CBD, so it's all too hard. But in fact, they're a valuable thing. I'd like to briefly focus on the ACT example. So the ACT decided back in early 2017 that they would have a Segway exemption to the road rules. And for those who've been to Canberra, Lake Burley Griffin is the focus, right next to the city. And Segways were able to be used around the lake. That spawned a Segway hire firm, which did quite reasonable business. And it got people used to the idea that pedestrians could share pathways and walkways with these relatively low-speed vehicles. Bear in mind, they weigh 60 kilos, so you wouldn't want to be in a collision with one. That trial went very well and was then expanded to Civic, the CBD. And ultimately, last year, we were able to get a full addition to the road regulations to allow e-scoots to be used across the ACT. How did we do that? Well, we did meeting, greeting and supporting of the pollies from all aspects. In the ACT, as you're probably aware, it's a local government situation. It's a city-state. So that in one way, that was a little bit easy. We were able to work very closely with the government, with the Legislative Assembly, some of the members there, and we ultimately ended up having a discussion paper which we drafted, and some of which was used in a period of going out for community consultation. We also obviously responded, and several of us responded, as well as officially from AEVA Canberra. We talked with Pedal Power, which is very strong in the ACT, a strong cycling community. They were initially a little sceptical, a little guarded. They were worried about sharing bike paths with scooters that would be ripping along at 50 kilometres an hour. We assured them that we weren't looking at anything like that. We talked to public transport advocates, and we'd like to feel that we used a considerable degree of pragmatism. We looked at the realities and what was going to be available and what was going to be possible, and we made progress. It was a really successful way to be able to get that to happen. I'm unsure what happened in Queensland. I was certainly up there after the AEVA conference when the first Lime trials were done at Southbank, and there was a fair bit of silliness going on there in the first week that the trial was launched. But ultimately, Queensland has embraced the e-scooters well. I've got a picture there on the right-hand side of a couple of the e-scoots for hire from companies. They have limited licenses to be able to operate within certain restricted areas in the ACT. And that's very successful. And at the moment, with spring coming on, there are lots and lots of people out using these devices, charged on a per minute basis. Ultimately, I believe we're missing the bus and we need to get on with it. And ultimately, the only way to go forward is to get the regulations changed and then enjoy. Thank you.
Thanks, Pete. That was great. Really enjoyed it, and I love the call to action there at the end. I feel motivated to go out there and lobby my local member right now. So thanks for that.